Welcome to Deathtalker.com. My name is Molly Carlisle. I'm the Deathtalker. Today I wanted to just have a little conversation with you about grief, because grief is one of those things that everybody thinks they understand. A lot of people think that the linear process of grieving is the way everyone should do it. So you go from stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3 to stage 4, and that's based on the work Elizabeth Kubler-Ross did way back in 1969. Interesting though, that work was done with people who were grieving in anticipation of their own death. So people in a hospice who had a terminal illness who were facing their own death. And she noticed common elements between their feelings associated with the fact that they weren't going to live as long as they thought they would. And after she wrote that initial book, everybody took that model and applied it across the board to people who were grieving. And so as a community, we got this misguided idea that there was a pathway to moving through grief that everyone had to follow in order to be grieving properly. As it turns out, that's not the case at all. There is no linear pathway. You don't move from one phase or stage to another phase or stage at any given time. And you're not doing it wrong if you're angry when someone else says you should be still in the sadness and withdrawn stage. Grief is just such a complex, chaotic, emotional roller coaster ride, really. And it's as individual as each person who's experiencing it, and as individual as the loss that the person is grieving. So let's start at the beginning. What causes grief? A loss. So the loss is whatever the event is. Now that could be a loss due to a death, or it could be a loss due to aging, or a loss of health, or a breakdown in a relationship, or a loss on a financial level, going bankrupt, or losing your house or your farm or whatever. All of those things are losses. Why? Because something has happened that has taken away from us a part of us that we really value. So of course death's going to fall into that category, but so does our health. So if I find that I have a chronic illness, I could well grieve for my healthy self, the self that I was before, that I'm not anymore. And as we age, we do that too. I'm sure plenty of you who've said goodbye to your last child starting prep will have had an experience of grief associated with that. Even though you're happy because, wow, you might get 5 minutes to yourself now because your kids are all at school. The other side of that is, if my last child started school, that means I'm now in a different part of my life. And another good example is the empty nest thing. So you have yourself surrounded by children for what seems like eons, and then eventually, one by one, they leave home. And then it may be just you, or it may be just you and your partner. And again, even though you're happy to have some time to yourself, you may well be grieving for the fact that that whole phase of your life is over now and a new phase is beginning. So grief is a very complex thing, and people grieve over a whole range of different losses. All that matters is that the thing that is taken away is something that they valued. If they valued it, they will grieve over it. And how does that grieving look? Well, of course, Our relationship with each individual thing is different. So if we think about it in terms of death, I will grieve differently over the death of my father to how I will grieve over the death of my partner, or over the death of a child, or over the death of someone who's a close friend or a neighbour. Why? Because my relationship with each and every one of those people is individual and unique. And therefore I will grieve for that unique relationship. And then part of my grieving process is around trying to maintain my relationship and my connection with that person in the absence of their physical presence. And that's what grieving is all about. That's what grieving people are trying to do. Create a sense of meaning around the death and maintain their relationship with that person even though they can't physically communicate with them. And this is where it gets hard for grieving people, because unless they've got somewhere to tell the story of their relationship and to talk about the person who's died, somewhere where people are prepared to listen to them tell that story over and over and over again, they find it very difficult to create a sense of meaning around the death and to maintain that relationship with the person in the absence of their physical presence. So when a death happens, in the first 24 to 48 hours, the grieving people, the people left behind, are actually in a state of shock. So their ability to take on board the reality of the death is often really challenged. And that's why it's important, where possible, to spend time with someone you love after they've died, because it assists you to come to terms with the reality of their death. If you can sit by their bedside and hold their hand and feel that their skin's no longer warm, it's cool now because their blood's not circulating through their body. If you have a chance to tell them the things that you maybe didn't get to tell them before they died, you get a chance to kiss them goodbye that one last time. You get a chance to close the door and say goodbye as you leave. All of that helps you to come to terms with the reality of their death. This is where it can get very difficult for people who don't have the opportunity to see the person after they've died. If the person dies overseas, for instance, or if they die in an accident where it's difficult for them to be identified. So if you think of victims of disasters, the Christchurch earthquakes, or September the 11th, where people's bodies weren't able to be identified, the people left behind really struggled with coming to terms with the reality of the death because they expected the person to come home. There was no proof, if you like, that the person had died. And that can make grieving very complex. So grief isn't a simple step-by-step process. It's unique, it's individual, it's subjective, which means I can't feel your grief and you can't feel mine. So saying things to people like, I know just how you feel, is not helpful because you don't know just how they feel. So maybe you'd like to have a think about people who you love who have died, and how the different relationships you had with each of those people influenced how you grieved after their death, and also how it influenced your ability to maintain your relationship with them after they've died. Now, what are the things that you keep that belong to different people? What are the things that, the memories that you hang on to? What are the songs that remind you of different people? Those sorts of things. I know myself, I have my dad's violin, and every time I play it, that keeps my relationship with him alive, even in the absence of his physical presence. So I hope you might find some interesting insights as you explore these ideas.